Okay, so it is 12 o'clock. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dr. Laura Caramonica, and I am the Vice President for Program Planning for the Association for Leadership Science and Nursing. ALSN is an international association dedicated to uniting academic and practice leaders to shape leadership science and education in nursing. Today, I have the esteemed honor of introducing our speaker, Dr. Christopher Lee, who is a professor and associate dean for research at Boston College School of Nursing in Chestnut Hill, Massachusetts. You can see from Dr. Lee's resume that he is a researcher and an authority in heart disease. He's done a lot of research in improving long-term care outcomes for patients and their families. And his expertise is in healthcare, in self-care, biological underpinnings of symptoms, and patient and care partner didactic research in chronic conditions. He has also been very involved in NIH and the American Heart Association. His research on adults and heart failure has earned him multiple honors from the Association of the American Heart Association. He's also been recognized as a leader in nursing science from the Heart Failure Society of America and the National Institute of Nursing Research and Friends of the National Institute of Nursing Research. Today, Dr. Lee is going to focus on a very, very important topic, authenticity and contemporary mentoring in health sciences. He has done extensive work on evidence-based practice in this area, and today's presentation, he will describe the role of coaching and mentorship. He will list key features of legacy and retirement exercises, explain the importance of providing strategic counseling in mentoring relationships, and discuss the importance of authenticity and whole self mentoring. So without further ado, I'm going to turn the slides over to Dr. Christopher Lee.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for that great introduction, Laura, and it's a pleasure to see everyone. So again, very happy to be here, and I was thrilled to learn about this association and its mission. And I'm very happy to talk about something that's quite near and dear to my heart. And I will say, I think since I submitted my bio, I was just given an endowed chair in nursing based on the Barry family and Goldman Sachs. And so I would regret not calling that out. I always start talks with disclosures, and these are just employment and active research grants in the areas that were discussed. Although this is quite a bit of a different lecture than I'm used to, that focuses almost entirely on my program of research, I feel obliged to give similar disclosures as I always do. What's really fun about this talk for me is that it's different than what's typically celebrated in my area of work. As was mentioned, and you probably got a sense of, I'm primarily nurse scientist, and I see my role primarily as a scientist. I was trained that way. I trained under Barbara Riegel, who's a nurse scientist who's incredibly well known in self-care of chronic illness, especially in cardiovascular disease. And what in my settings with the American Heart Association and Heart Failure Society of America, and even international organizations that are focused on self-care of chronic illness, usually what we're here to talk about is the research and kind of the common list of accolades and accomplishments that come with that. And so here's just kind of like a smattering of things that I've been able to achieve in my brief research career. Again, to really comment on what is typically celebrated in this type of venue. And when I'm asked to talk, it's almost always linked to one of these topics. But I'm really happy today that I'm actually not going to talk about my research at all, and instead talk about something that altruistically I hold in such high import, and that is, of course, the mentoring piece. I figured I'd start with a few frames of reference, and the first is that several years ago, when I was still working in Oregon, at Oregon Health and Science University, I was a science director for a K-12 training program that was interdisciplinary. It was actually part of this program called Building Interdisciplinary Research Careers in Women's Health, or BIRCH is a acronym for that program. And in that program, I got exposed to this great free resource that's from the National Academies Press, but it really came from the National Academy of Science, National Academy of Engineering. But it's called Advisor, Teacher, Role Model, and Friend. And this came out 25 years ago, but this has some really phenomenal nuggets that hold true, that are enduring characteristics on what it's like to really be a mentor to anyone that's in health sciences more generally, or even engineering. And you can download this for free if you're interested. I'm not so sure if the National Academy of Sciences has plans to update this text. And again, because I think the salient features of this text are fairly enduring and are very much still relevant today. Let's see. Several years ago now, back in 2015, I was asked to kind of publish my thoughts, along with several other members of the American Heart Association, our perspectives on what successful mentoring relationships really look like. And contextually, this was still very much focused on scientific mentoring. And we did this on behalf of the Cardiovascular and Stroke Nursing Council of the American Heart Association. And this is also kind of a nice resource if you're interested in this topic. Again, it helps kind of provide a bit of a frame of reference of where I come from in this. And there's a few things that I've really pulled out from this paper that speak to scientific mentoring, but definitely apply to mentoring more broadly. And one is kind of a list of traits that we thought would be helpful when you're trying to establish a mentor-mentee relationship. So really the origins of the relationships, kind of vetting each other out. And some of the things that we pulled out as being really important are having common career goals. And as an example of what we meant by that, you know, I'm the type of person that would be fabulous to help you in a successful trajectory in securing, say, National Institutes of Health funding for your program of research. That's my skill set. That's how I spend my life, my 80-hour work week. And that's how I can best help somebody have at least a similar career pathway. Whereas, you know, regrettably, as much as I love the practice of nursing, I've been out of the practice for many years now. And I wouldn't be a great coach in helping you get through your current clinical shift in, say, the intensive care unit. Or if you really wanted to teach as a larger part of your academic role, then I love teaching. I absolutely love teaching, even didactic teaching, and I have a great passion for that. But if that's what you want to have as your career trajectory, that's probably not. I'm probably not the person to be involved with your mentoring. That's what we really meant about having a common career goal. We also thought that like having a similar work ethic and even a personality match can be quite helpful. So when we think of the work ethic, if you know, we all know people that work in our areas, whether it be clinical or leadership, management, research, teaching, who just have like a very strong internal compass, a really strong drive, and are just uber productive people. And we also know that there are people in all of those same settings that we know and love and work that are really just trying to put in the minimum amount of work, get through the 40-hour work week, whatever it may be, but not have really any internal drive or aspirations, and sometimes even the support to be really exceptional at what they do. So, you know, feeling each other out in terms of what the work ethic is like can also be helpful, just like it would be in other aspects of our life. And then for the personality match, I mean, this really applies to all relationships. You know, you probably don't want the exact same type of personality, but you want to really have working flow and ways of communicating that are at least complementary and in which there's some mutuality. You don't really want to have personality clashes. And since some of these are qualities in establishing the mentor-mentee relationship, this is really like in the courting process. And I can tell you like how many times I've had a trainee tell me that trainees who have worked with other mentors, that they were getting from the first communication or the first email or the first in-person connection, they were already getting signals of kind of personality clash. So I think, as people, we really have to be in tune to that and really listen to that, because it does speak volumes about how this is going to go over the course of your kind of academic or practice leadership management trajectory. And if it's not great in the courting process, the origin of this relationship, it's not going to in the long run. The second to last bullet point under establishing the successful mentor-mentee relationship is really this mutual commitment to the process. There's trials and tribulations anytime that you're starting anything new, and relationships are not an exception to that. So at least if both the mentor and the mentee can just commit to a communication style, a communication plan, that you're going to be equally committed to the success of the mentee, even if the elements of that success essentially change over the course of that relationship. It's really just committing to make sure that the mentee is successful, and to kind of have as much of that in somewhat of a contract, or at least in some written exchange in the beginning. And then, just like all types of relationships, not just exclusive to mentor-mentee relationships, of course, is just flexibility. Knowing that plans are just plans, and lots of things change in the course of even a mentee's progression through an academic program or a clinical or managerial program. So flexibility is super key. We also outlined a few factors that are essential to cultivating the relationship, to keep it going over time. And there's a few salient themes that I pulled out from this article that I figured it would be interesting to start with. And the first is really learning when to lead, when to follow, and to not be involved. So this is like in the context of working with somebody that you've had an established relationship. There's probably still a bit of a power dynamic if you're talking about a mentor and mentee. But I will share with you, like my mentor, Barbara Regal, with whom I still have a weekly contact with, even though I haven't really directly trained under her since 2009 or so. She shared with me kind of late in my evolution of my pre-doctoral fellowship that at one point she realized the best thing that she could do to help me is to actually stay out of my way a little bit. And that's just a wonderful example of somebody who's markedly more successful than I have been, especially then, and completely committed to my success. But then thinking about, is there a way that she can be most helpful to me that may mean followership and may not mean leadership at all? And then as another example, again, with my mentor, Barbara Regal, we were involved with a project several years after I was already an independent scientist. And a project that she was kind of pitching just was not really resonating with me at all. So even though initially I said, sure, this sounds like something that would be of great interest, the very extensive international team was involved. And after a while, I said, you know what, I think if there's an opportunity for me to respectfully bow out and say the best way I think I can be helpful for this project is for me personally not to be involved with it, to make room for the growth of some others on the team, and to help highlight some areas of expertise of people who are not me on the team. And these are also parts of healthy relationships over time too. So that's something to consider in terms of cultivating this relationship. And I also think there's lots of opportunities to mutually support each other's career. So you've been in a mentor-mentee relationship for a while. Why not, as a mentee, think about, is there an award that I could nominate my mentor for? Are they going up for an advancement step? Are they going to try to make a career change and could have some successful tips for success? Or is there a way that you could help counsel them on making a career change, even though you're in the role still as a mentee? And then also many years after you've had a formal relationships in terms of the training, when you're now in the informal phase, is there a way that the mentor can support the mentee? Absolutely, because most of us in the academic research side of things, the commitment to a mentee is essentially lifelong. And that's something that was modeled for me and something that I hold near and dear to my heart as well. And then the last bullet point here, again, about cultivating a mentor-mentee relationship that's successful over time, is just relationship maintenance. So we think of like how our relationships have changed since December of 2019, and now, a lot of the relationships have changed a little bit. We may not be as in touch with some people that we care for tremendously, or that we want to work with. So we always have to spend some time and energy just on the relationship itself, not even the work, but just checking in with each other personally, making time when it is afforded to us to have in-person opportunities to kind of meet and connect. That's what we meant about that relationship maintenance. So again, I just mentioned these because it's a kind of frame of reference. So you get a little bit greater understanding of me and kind of my background and some of the underpinnings of kind of the rest of the talk today. So a few things here. These are just some kind of fun pictures of me from when I was a younger man. And I was kind of inspired to think back on this last fall when one of my PhD students, as part of a PhD course requirement, made an appointment with me and asked really what surprised me the most in my academic career thus far. And I said to her surprise, that having success in scientific mentoring actually was a surprise. Because I think that mentoring is just like other things that we do in our lives. We may not know that these are things that we're going to be good at until we put a firm like investment into this opportunity, and also, put the thousands of hours into developing expertise. And if you all could just think about other things outside of your work that you're really good at, that you've developed expertise, that even if you look back, if this was something in the past, something that you were really good at, something that was important to you, and you put in the time and energy, that likely was a culmination of a lot of failures and some successes. And I think if we look outside of our professional work, if we look outside of our academic or managerial work to our other spheres of our lives, we can actually learn a lot more about leadership and a lot more about even mentoring than we can sometimes in our own work spheres. And again, this whole notion that the failures in each one of these endeavors are much more informative. They tell us much more. We learn many more life lessons from the failures than we do successes, to the point where if you think of the sum total of your experience in any one particular area, like mentoring, then it's really the total of the failures minus the successes. I also think this is really true in science. If any of you on this webinar are scientists yourselves, if all of your hypotheses that you put out there are correct, then science is actually pretty boring. It might be successful, but it's actually pretty boring. It's really things that you've tried and brutally failed, or hypotheses that were not only were not endorsed, but the answer was like diametrically opposed to what you hypothesized. Those are the things that kind of drive you, and those are the ones that help you actually ask really important and innovative questions. And again, it's really kind of boring. So in some, I think it's a bit of a fool's errand to just think about our own work sphere in terms of what we can learn about research or mentoring and even leadership. I think it's really important to reflect on other aspects of our life and what it took to really have competence and to even develop expertise over time. But you'll learn a lot more from work outside of our own work spheres. Let me just switch slides here. Let me go back one. So the first thing that I really want to talk about as a topic is mentoring as a coach. And there's this great book, if you haven't read it, by Landsberg that came out in 2015 called The Tao of Coaching. And it's really talking about effectiveness at work and being more effective by really inspiring those around you. So I wasn't really taught to mentor as a coach. In my academic life, I was really taught to mentor as a coach from a coach. So when I was in college, I had an extreme privilege of working with this man who's pictured in the middle. This is Dr. Dale Barkey, and he's a PhD prepared chemical engineer. But my intersection with him in my life was as my judo coach in undergraduate. And I bring this up today because Dale taught me a really important lesson about kind of coaching and just even a perspective on working with a mentee. Up until my exposure to Dale, I had been involved with martial arts. My wife was involved with martial arts. She was actually ranked #1 in the world for many, many years. But the entirety of our experience, if you were ever in competition with your mentor in martial arts, it was really expected that if you were faced up against one another in a competition, that you would essentially bow out and in so doing forfeit as a sign of respect to your mentor. So every competition I had done, every competition that my wife had been involved with, paired against your mentor, you bow out, you forfeit as a sign of respect. And then Dale's perspective on this was actually quite different. And in fact, to him, one of the biggest gifts that you could ever give him in your life was to train really extensively over multiple years, such that you could eventually beat him, best him in competition. And he didn't just want you to try, he really wanted you to try your best and to learn the techniques well enough so that you could beat somebody that's a true master and has been doing this for many years. And the picture on the far right is actually from when I was eventually able to bestow upon my mentor the supreme gift of beating him in competition. So I bring that up because I still think that especially on the academic side of healthcare, mentoring is always mentioned. Mentoring is always mentioned as being really important. But I still think that there's a lot of competition between mentees and mentors. I still think a lot of mentors are really trying to continue to establish themselves and continuously trying to publish a lot of papers and to win a lot of grants. And sometimes that's to the disservice of their mentees. If you're still competing for the same small pots of funds or for the big gains in scientific development, then there's something that just always kind of bothered me about that. You know, my take on mentoring under this like coaching perspective is that one of the best things that you could be is be far more successful than I in my research. And I've already really had the gift of working with mostly female nurse scientists who are already at my level, if not way above my level in terms of kind of impact and quality of the work. And then again, this is one of the best things that you could ever do for me. I have this shared embodied approach as my old judo coach. But I have to say that that's still pretty rare. And I don't come across it that much especially on the academic side. The other thing that about coaching, when you think about mentoring from a coaching perspective, you do a lot more asking and listening than you do talking. And I have to say that this is something that I've had to strategically change over my career in terms of the mentoring about science in particular, is that I used to want to really jump in to give like advice. I would really want to jump in to do some of the work for my mentees, especially if they were struggling. Like my visceral response was to do, to judge, to intersect as a way to try to help them. And I realized after a few years of taking on this approach, what a tremendous disservice that is to them personally and to their trajectory of independence, because those kind of struggles are really what can help shape you as a scientist for sure. But anytime I were to actually like play the game for my mentees, that didn't work very well. And I still think that for some of my trainees, I still think it's a bit of a problem that I just jumped in, had too much of a hand-on approach. So I also like this notion of coach that, the coach actually doesn't play the game for you. They can jump on the court. Sorry to use too many sports analogies at this point, but an effective coach actually doesn't play the game. They cannot physically come and replace you as a player on the field, but they can give you encouragement. They can give you strategy. They can give you feedback. They can listen. They can ask lots of questions. And the more inquisitive of a mentor you can be, the more that coaching by asking questions instead of giving statements, and the more that you can listen, coaching by listening, I think that's better for everybody. And it is interesting that when you think of people who do coach by making statements, that does involve kind of judgment. They tend to be like judgmental people, as opposed to people that respond to an issue with lots of questions. That's a sign of really inquisitive people. And I think that inquisitive people tend to make better mentors, particularly with respect to this coaching element. Let me just limit this so I can still see. Let me go back. All right. The next thing that I want to mention, and then I think the plan is to open up the questions at the end. I see some coming in the chat. If there's something that I should stop and address, then please let me know. Otherwise, I think we'll address the questions at the end, Laura, if that's okay. So the next thing I want to talk about is mentoring as a colleague. So I'm a nurse. Not everyone may be a nurse on the call, and I've certainly benefited from working with people from lots of different disciplines within health and external to health. But I've used this fake newspaper clipping for several talks, even before COVID, although I have to say I've used it a lot more after COVID. And what this is, it's actually a fake newspaper clipping from allegedly what this great Antarctic explorer, Ernest Shackleton, allegedly put in the paper to try to solicit help on what then became a pretty ill-fated Antarctic journey, and then eventually became one of the greatest stories of fortitude and perseverance in the world's history. But essentially what this is him asking for volunteers wanted for a hazardous journey, small wages, bitter cold, long months of complete darkness, constant danger, safe return doubtful, and honor and recognition only in the case of success. And unfortunately, I wish it was a legitimate article, but it was revealed to be a hoax. But when I think of that, I think of, you could replace, it actually said men wanted, but you could say nurses wanted. You could see, and any other health profession or person that we're potentially sending into a really tough work environment. And what a terrible way to try to recruit the best people to be able to do this. At the same time, it actually reflects a lot of common elements that kind of plague elements of healthcare. And I do have to say, sometimes when we are mentoring people, nurse scientists, nurses, other members of the healthcare disciplines, this is actually essentially the environment in which we are mentoring them to be successful. It isn't always smooth sailing. There's lots of turbulence. There's a lot of terrible things that we want to help them avoid in their career so that they can feel both personally and professionally fulfilled. And I do think that, unfortunately, in academic nursing, lots of us have come from places where we have endured really toxic work environments. And I also think that in terms of like advancement through certain structures, a lot of us have had to really go through advancement and hit these completely arbitrary benchmarks. Sometimes they're proposed by people who themselves would never in a million years meet these benchmarks. So there's these kind of like hazardous aspects of some work environments. There's some nebulousness to some advancement structures. And that's all really problematic and not to be solved on this call or any other. But the reason I bring it up is I think that this is just a very real part of the work for a lot of my colleagues and trainees. And you can't really like separate somebody and their potential or what we're kind of advising them to do. You can't really separate that from where they work and the current challenges that they are undertaking. We can't pretend that everyone is working in the top 5 institutions in the country and that they have these really pristine and elaborately resourced areas where they work. A lot of us don't work in that. We work in resource austere environments, if you will. So I'd like to just acknowledge that. One thing that I want to mention is that I use the slogan a lot. The whole keep calm part of this meme has been expanded into lots of different areas in social media. But I like this one in particular where it says, let's get the show on the road. And the reason that I bring this one up is because this is part of my mentoring strategy to always talk about somebody in terms of them and their ability to get the show on the road. And the reason that I do that is because it really implies two very important things. One, it implies that you have a good show. And in my realm, that really means that you have like an incredibly well articulated program of research. You probably have one or two contingency strategies or kind of hobbies that you have kind of ready to go if your main ideas that you're moving forward just aren't gaining enough momentum. And it means that the main idea at least is like really well aligned with multiple sources of potential funding. And you have like a really nicely articulated short and long-term plan of how you're going to actually move an area of science and have some degree of intellectual claim over that area of science over the course of your career. And that it takes a lot to get to that, but that's kind of the show. And the reason why I spend so much time talking with my mentees about actually the show is because I think this is where you can be a really good colleague, to not assume that it's exactly how you've done things, or it's how that your mentor has done things, or it's really that a mentee has to follow any one particular pathway to success, that they should have ultimate freedom in thinking about what success is going to look like for them individually. And that takes a lot of dialogue back and forth and a lot of kind of revisiting the plan, the short and long-term plan. But that's what I mean about the show. And then I always say, you got to get the show on the road, meaning you have to have a road. Like, how is it that you are going to try to advance the science? How is it that you're going to work to disseminate the important findings to the public? What about the key societies that are involved in this area of influence? I've been lucky enough to work with the American Heart Association and the Heart Failure Society of America quite extensively in my career. And that's what I mean. Like, what are the main avenues under which I can really try to promote this and try to submit my science and to really promote this idea as having value all the way from professional societies down to the public. Again, I think a lot of my very detailed mentoring conversations really come down to this very simply: let's get the show on the road. I do want to talk about what was mentioned in the beginning as a bit of a legacy exercise. So I do think that something that's quite helpful at really any point in your career is to engage in something called a legacy. Sometimes it's called a retirement. Sometimes it's even called a eulogy exercise. And it's something that I encourage my mentees to do really early, even if they're still in their pre-doctoral training and kind of often throughout their career. And it's quite simple. You would envision your retirement party, at the end of all this, or if you're more grim, think about it, the eulogy, like, who would you want to say something about you in your life's work? And then what is it that you would like them to say about you? And the reason I think that this is important is it can be quite like a grounding experience. And I have to say, especially with my early career trainees, because often what comes up for them is really nothing to do with the work, right? If you literally think about you're ending your work life, or if you're more grim and take the eulogy approach, like it's the end of your life, it's somebody that's going to comment on the sum total of your life's existence. A lot of people aren't even going to know about the work. And a lot of people aren't going to know about the specifics of what you do on a day-to-day basis, because that's not what's important to them about you. And that's actually not like all of your human contributions to the world are not wrapped up necessarily in the day-to-day work. So I think it's really an important exercise of self-reflection. I have my mentees share that so we can kind of talk about that as a way to like realign some of the work so that their work really resonates more with what they want to accomplish and what they, at the end of this, they want to kind of leave behind in terms of that legacy. Again, that's that kind of legacy or eulogy exercise. And I have a particular image that I put up here because it must have been 10 years ago now. I was at a conference in San Antonio, Texas, and I met up with a childhood friend of mine who became a sports psychologist. And I said, I definitely have to see what she's up to. and where her life has taken her. So we had plans to meet up for dinner. And over the course of dinner, she essentially, asked, how are things going? Tell me about your life. And I was really like in the launch phase of my research career. And apparently all I really talked about was, I'm doing this and I'm submitting this grant and I'm publishing these papers and I'm trying to have some more discovery in this area of research. And it was just all about the work, I'm sure. I was probably boring her to death. And the entire time I was speaking, however, she was essentially scribbling on a napkin, like doodling on a napkin. And I noticed it pretty early, and it's to like irritate me a little bit, because I was like, she's not paying attention, and she's like a sports psychologist for a living, and I was starting to get really like judgmental about how is it that she's not even paying attention to what I'm sure was this like glorious story of my work and my stress. And eventually she turned the napkin around, and what it was is like this picture of an epitaph on it, and it said like, "Here lies Chris, he worked a lot." And it was like, she's confronting me with like all that spewed out of my mouth at the time was just work, stress. And it was a great opportunity for her to kind of redirect my thinking away from like the work and the stress of the work, and to allow me probably for the first time to really reflect on this type of eulogy or legacy exercise. What is it that I hold in greatest value? What is it that I hold in greatest and highest import? And at the end of my career, at the end of all this, what is it that I really want to leave behind? And that exercise has helped me kind of realign and make several decisions across my career, no matter how short it is. So that's kind of the utility of that legacy or eulogy exercise, and something that's pretty easy to recreate. So the next thing that I want to talk about is mentoring as counsel. And I have to say, no matter what area we work in now, if you work with people that are relatively early in their career at anything, even if they've had multiple careers in the past, so I don't mean young persons, I mean people that are new to the type of work that they're doing, then what we get to witness in their training is a bit of what I call a confluence of becoming. Because we get to see them become, for me, we get to see them become nurse scientists. And at the same time, they're really like becoming or reinventing themselves as persons in the world. And that is amazing thing to be able to witness. But we also get them to witness some of them like become parents. We get to see some of them, have children. We get to see some of them experience and suffer with illness for themselves, for their parents, for the children, for their partners. We get to see some of them get married. We see the dissolution of marriages and others. And it's really hard to detangle the mentoring, especially the scientific mentoring piece, from these like very humanizing elements of the work and the life, because, they as mentees don't really separate this. They don't separate the other aspects of their life and the work itself. And if you reflect back on it, what we do really witness is a lot of suffering and a lot of loss. And that's a lot to take on as a mentor. But again, it's indistinguishable. And I have to say, over COVID in particular, it got really challenging for me to invest myself to the extent I really wanted with my mentees. And they had like really big life decisions to make, career altering decisions to make. And the only time that I could find and that I could commit to have what I call counseling phone calls with my mentees was on Saturday mornings while my two kids depicted here were taking their hip hop dance classes. And I have to say, during every single, so my mentees would essentially schedule themselves for whatever Saturday I could get them on for a call. And I have to say that the vast majority of the time that I spend mentoring somebody from this counseling perspective, in my role as a scientific mentor, in my role as colleague, even in my role as a dean for research, I spend a lot of my time convincing people like not to submit grants, not to take on big projects. I spend a lot of my time asking about their personal health and what the decision will mean to their personal health, what their decision will mean to their family health. And then here I am trying to cram in what limited opportunity I have to help counsel and mentor while my kids are dancing. And so I've been distracting you, of course, on one side, of a picture of my daughter, who obviously got all of her style and pizzazz from her mother, and then my son, who got his amazing dance moves from me. But again, this is the part of not really being able to separate the humanizing elements of our life experience from the counsel that we're giving and the counsel that we're taking in that mentor-mentee relationship. So things to consider there. So the last thing that I really want to mention as a topic, and then I'll get to addressing some of the questions, is mentoring somebody as a friend. And I don't talk about this very often in my professional or even personal circles, to be quite honest, especially since I work at a Jesuit institution. But I took formal Buddhist vows in the late 90s, which is just about as long as I've actually been a nurse. And what being Buddhist means to me is spiritually, is that I strive to have great intention in what's called the Eightfold Path. And what that means is to try to live with the right understanding, with the right thought, having the right speech, taking the right action, having the right livelihood, and etc. I've listed this here for you. And as an example of what that means to me personally is, I'll start on the good side. I've always had a lifelong commitment to abstain from alcohol and other drugs. I've actually never had alcohol in my entire life. And that is a decision that I have been able to make because Buddhism is part of my life. So that's something that has worked well for me. But I have to admit, I am completely imperfect in living the Buddhist life. And the third bullet point here is the right speech. And I'm from Boston. I'm a Bostonian by birth. My dad was born in South Boston, has this absolutely outrageous Boston accent that I actually try to hide periodically because it's just absolutely crazy. But coming with all that, I have an absolutely foul mouth. And I have a foul mouth in professional settings, always have as a nurse, meaning I use like terrible language. And I like to describe it as, I have the mouth like a truck driver, but I feel when I say that it's not really fair to truck drivers, to be quite honest, because it can be really, I think that's offensive because it can get really bad. And so the reason I say this is because, what being Buddhist to me and my friendships with my mentees really means is that they get the whole self. They get me, they get the things that I do well, they get the things where I really need to work on. They get all the imperfections, all the strengths, all the weaknesses, all the benefits, and again, all the imperfections. And I've found great reward in sharing in full authenticity my whole personal life. And I also have to say that I also share my family life with many of my trainees. And here's a picture of two of my trainees, Dr. Ken Faulkner and Dr. Jessica Harmon Thompson, who did 2-year-long postdoctoral fellowships with me from a distance. Ken lived in New York and Jessica lived in Kentucky. And they would come up to and have some intensive long week experiences with me in Boston. And I felt like if I was to give them my best, and if they were to see the best of me, that they should come and stay with my family when they're in town to help them financially, but also just to expose them to the very real elements of my life, even though the exclusive focus of their postdoctoral fellowship was to give them advantage in their scientific trajectories. And then they were essentially became embedded as part of my family to the point where my kids still ask, like, when are they going to be able to see Ken and Jessica again? And I think, like, to harmonize really all these 4 elements that I've brought up so far, what it comes down to me effective mentoring, what that really comes down to me is approaching it with your whole self and also focusing on your mentees as whole people. And that is, arguably a big ask. It's a big ask and it's a big commitment, which is why it's something that we can't really enter into very lightly. We have to think very strategically about people that we want to work with and that we do want to be fully authentic with. And the more organic that can be, instead of being like told that you need to mentor this person, if it can have some complementary nature, then I think that's the moments when we really can have that degree of authenticity that we both kind of desire and can benefit from. So I do want to kind of share some of my mentees. Here's just a few, actually, of mentees that I've worked with over the past 10 years or so, here and abroad. I love working with early career scientists, especially in Europe, Australia, Japan, and the Philippines is kind of the new place where I do a lot of this mentoring. And the reason that I show all of their images is because each one of these now scientists are markedly successful people, but there aren't two people pictured here that have actually had the same trajectory towards success. And these are people that with some effective coaching and some effective counsel and approaching them kind of with this authenticity, they have carved out very unique pathways. For some of them, it's much more about having family life balance. For many of them, it's really just all about the accelerated scientific trajectory. But again, everyone on the slide has really had an independent pathway to success, all markedly successful by internal and external benchmarks, but they've all done it in a very kind of creative and unique way. So those are the main elements that I wanted to share with you. And I'm certainly happy to kind of look through the chat and answer questions if that would be helpful. And then Laura said that she might moderate that discussion piece. So why don't we open it up to kind of questions and answers at this point? And then maybe I'll stop sharing if that's okay.
There is only a few people, just a small group of people on the chat today. So, if you would like to unmute and ask the question, I'm going to give you that opportunity before I ask my two questions.
Great.
So please do. It's amazing. You gave us a lot of great information. I do know that we would like to get the link to the
Right.
National Academy Press book
Right.
that you said we could download. That would be fabulous if you could put that in the chat while I'm doing the closing. That would be really helpful. And but anyone, do you want to unmute and ask a question before I? Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay, if you want, I'll start. You gave us a lot of insight into the mentoring relationship when it is a long-term relationship, and for many of us, those relationships are not lifelong. And
Right.
So, how would you kind of tailor a successful relationship, a mentoring relationship, if one, it was short-term, but also if it was assigned? Versus something that, Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, certainly. So, and I'll speak to that, I think mainly as my role of an associate dean for research, because my job in my school is to mentor everybody, which is as insane as that is, that's like the task at hand. And in many instances, what that means is I am paired with people that have conflicting personalities, different work ethic, different career aspirations, different pedigree, different resources, different support for their work. And the way that I've found that you can still be helpful is to make it really like project oriented. So I may not be able to help somebody become like have career-long success in science, but I can help push them to the next step of their independence. And so, for example, like if it's somebody that is thinking about the next grant to submit, then I can just tap into my expertise as a grant reviewer and writer and say, maybe I can give you like the top 3 suggestions that are going to be really helpful for you. So let's just focus on those for now, and then let's not worry about the rest and the aspects of mismatch and the aspects of incompatibility. It doesn't matter. Let's just focus on the product. So to make that relationship much more product oriented, I think is really helpful. And over the long run too. So if you're working with somebody very short term, then I think making the mentoring focused on a product or a project that is usually pretty term limited is the way to have success there. And I think Betsy has her hand up. Yeah.
Yeah. Most of, and yet there's got to be an element of, like you're saying, bringing that whole self into that.
Right.
So do you find that it's more constructive to do it in I'll call it a more neutral area, like meet, for coffee, or, or meet, outside, in an outside lounge area, or, and not make it feel so business oriented. And I don't know the answer. I'm just saying, is there something that you bring into that experience that makes it be more than, how would you say, orientation or instructive?
Right. Yeah, no, I'll often ask, trying to move to this coaching by asking more than just talking. I'll often ask, what role do you want me to have? Do you want me to be like the cheerleader? Do you want me to be the critic? Do you want me to be like do you want me to have my dean hat on? Do you want feedback on the friend level? Like what's going to be most helpful for you at this moment? And people are pretty good about telling you that, like, no, I don't really want the critic. I can't take the critic now. Okay, then I can be like the people mover, the cheerleader. I could be the friend here to just listen to you. Like if you're not ready for the full-on authentic Chris who will tell you everything that needs to happen in order to make this product viable, I totally get it. I mean, who would want that all the time? So I often ask, like, what type of response do you want? Like, what's going to be most helpful for you now? Yeah.
Thank you. Very good point. Did anybody think of a question that you would like to ask at this time?
I think Betsy has her hand up. Yeah.
Betsy.
What about if someone does not want to be on the R01 trajectory? Early on in my career, I realized I saw many of my colleagues, and you can tell how old I am, submitting grant after grant, getting pink slip after pink slip. And I thought, I don't want that.
Right.
I like teaching and small grants and, doing some research. Heather knows I participate in the research, but I'm not interested. I actually was on an R01 team early on here at Indiana State. And I went, I could see the flaws in the grants, and then I knew it wasn't going to get funded, and exactly didn't get funded because of what I saw. But that isn't me.
Yeah, no. So, and it's not for everybody. It's actually like a very limited trajectory to success. Even the NIH model is very limiting. I mean, it's a very biomedical model, and it's not for everybody. But I think, like, even of the images that I depicted of all the mentees that I've worked with, several of them have taken that multiple R01 pathway to success and very kind of early career advancement and progression and early promotion and all that other stuff. And others have not. Others have said, that isn't really me. My first doctoral student actually is an expert in simulation, and you're not going to get NIH funded work on simulation. So she wouldn't be eligible to take that pathway. So yeah, but I saw the science in her and a fabulous idea, a little bit of strategic coaching along the way, and then she was really able to launch in an independent fashion, really without ever having to match that NIH pathway.
Well, I think it's important to coach people to pick the organization that matches your career goals.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, well, fabulous presentation, Dr. Lee. And I really, and I think all of us did enjoy enjoyed, seeing the trajectory of you developing yourself as a person and the challenges that made you who you are and how you science, and then to your mentoring relationship. That was, it was really put it in perspective. And so thank you again. And I'm now going to take a few minutes to just close our conference. I did forget. So Robert, if you'll put up our disclosure statement. Thank you. I did forget to say that there is no conflict of interest for anyone with the, with this activity for today, and that you are eligible for CEs. You will get a link for a short survey that I'd like you to complete, and then you will be able to get one contact hour for nursing for your certificate of attendance. And then last but not least, I'm excited to say that this year we are back in person, and that we're going to be at Case Western at the Francis Payne Bolton School of Nursing, where we will have our conference this year. It's Leadership Science and Nursing, creating new solutions for new challenges, and it will be outstanding. We do have two pre-conferences. That one will be on the new essentials, and the other one will be on evidence-based practice and transitional science. And both of these workshops, you do not have to attend the full conference. So, please send your students, your faculty that would like to spend a full day, really getting into these. That would be really something that you might want to think about. Again, our conference will be November 3rd through the 5th in Cleveland, Ohio. I'm excited for an in-person conference, and I hope that all of you will be there. So thank you again for today.